Let's see, get some numbers up there. Hi, everyone, and welcome to Eye on ESI. This is our March 2025 episode. I am Maribel Rivera, Vice President of Strategy and Client Engagement at ACEDS. I am joined today by President Mike Quartararo and founder and CEO of True Staffing, Jared Coseglia, and our special guest this week, or this month, I will say, is Kelly Twigger, founder and CEO of eDiscovery Assistant and principal at ESI Attorneys. Sorry, Kelly, almost
That's
forgot.
all right. Everybody does it.
Awesome. Thank you all for joining us. As usual, before we get started, I just want to make sure everyone who is joining us, if you are a newbie, if you've been here before, you already know how this works. If you're a newbie, this is a really fast-paced. We go very quickly. Let us know in the chat that you're new. Get acquainted with everyone else. Ask questions. This is not just the four of us talking to each other, but we really want to answer your questions. We want to share with you what we know, what's going on in the job market, how careers are moving. So let's get started. Jared, do you want to kick us off?
Oh yeah, let's jump right in. We got lots of new trends, and where do we get all these trends from? Well, here's the data sources that we dip into just to give everybody a sense of the scope of where we're gathering intelligence. You can look at this on our website too if you want to dive a little bit deeper. But when we look at the trends, oh yes, and of course, every month we start with our top 5 hottest jobs, and we've selected a cadre here of positions to show you just how diversified from a geographic perspective the market is getting. We're seeing a lot of uptick in demand in London, Dublin, other parts of Europe. But again, like a lot of this is still in the middle, specialists, project managers, analysts, but we are seeing some senior level positions. We've got some chief revenue officer positions. We're seeing some litigation support manager, director positions open up. So there's a good diversity of opportunity in the marketplace with a large percentage of it in the middle. If you don't know Michael and Michelle on my team, you should know them. They are fabulous and have access to everything. So trends, and I'm really excited about the trends because there are some changes from what we've seen as sort of recurring trends.
More money, more money, more money.
Yeah, more money. So big change here. We've had burnout as the #1 motivator for why job seekers are looking for other opportunities and employment elsewhere. And that has been overtaken by wanting to be paid more money. A couple of reasons why. The first of which is we aren't seeing interest rates go down. We are seeing the stock market go down almost 10 to 12 to 15%, depending on where you trade. And I think that's got people a little scared about cash and finances. It's also making people want to have more cash to potentially invest in a down market or a down economy if we are to go into recession. So money is front of mind for a lot of job seekers. But also, we've had burnout as the #1 motivator for nearly a year, a little bit more. And I think a lot of job seekers have now accepted that they are not going to find a higher quality of life at another employer and make more money, or even lateral, or even a little bit less. And so they want to be paid for the work that they're putting in. And we're seeing money drive a lot of people that are coming to the marketplace right now, which is a huge change, but a fascinating one, and also indicative of the increases in compensation we're seeing people get at point of hire, which, as we'll see in a second, is still around 10 to 20%, which is a big uptick from what we were seeing people get increases on base salary at the point of hire in 2024. We are seeing direct hire accelerate quite a bit. So if you're in the privacy job market, I'm going to probably give you the exact opposite guidance, which is this is a contractor's market. It's a contract to hire market. In eDiscovery right now, there's a good amount of both, but there is a lot of FTE hiring, lots of demand. There's about to be a lot of turnover again in February. We're sort of seeing these every 3-week cycles where there are large amounts of resignations, and then that triggers another wave of opportunities for the month ahead. Fully remote work hit 0 placements for us for the first time in 5 years last month.
Wow.
It's the first time.
Yeah.
Now, part of that is because most remote jobs that are fully remote, right? Not hybrid, but fully remote are contract jobs. And the eDiscovery community right now is really focused on full-time hiring. There are contract opportunities, but a lot less than what we've seen in years past relative to the amount of full-time. And we'll break that down for you in a chart so you can see the month-over-month difference between full-time and contract hiring that we're tracking in eDiscovery. But most fully remote jobs these days are contract jobs. We just haven't seen as many of those. Also, more fully remote jobs are at vendors. And we're seeing law firms still being the dominant hiring vertical in the marketplace right now is still law firms. The vendors are still running very lean. We are seeing an uptick in their hiring, but not as extreme as one might think with the amount of litigation that's happening. We're going to talk about that amount of litigation with Kelly in a second. He's got some incredible data for us that I'm really excited to share with everybody. You can tell I'm moving faster than usual through this particular part of the presentation.
Yes.
Jared, before you
yeah.
jump, what are these fully remote roles? Just to be a little more specific.
Yeah, for the most part, they're contract. But in terms
Project
of the
oriented
jobs, they're project managers, data processors, analysts, sales engineering, not usually leadership jobs, right? Most leadership jobs are going to have an in-office requirement, or they're going to want you somewhere geographically centralized because that's where the stakeholders are. There are some exceptions to that rule, but for the most part, they're mid-market opportunities, the ones that are fully remote.
Cool, thanks. Carry on.
Yeah, we mentioned this briefly. Salaries are increasing, right? I mean, 10 to 20% a point higher compared to 4 to 9% in 2024. So it's a big jump. It's almost double, maybe triple for some people, what the opportunity for an increase in comp was. Employers seem to be willing to pay a little bit more. We're seeing salaries in mid-market slowly inch up as opposed to stagnate, which means they're wanting a higher caliber. They're willing to pay a little bit more for that higher caliber. And we're seeing that happen in the marketplace. And finally, the skill sets are evolving. And this will be a nice transition. For those of you that were with us last month with Rose Jones, we sort of went over this in great detail, and I'm not going to go into it in great detail here, but I sort of threw it up here as a little bit of a transition into our conversation with Kelly, because Kelly's got some amazing data, and it is different, right? In this slide here, we're talking a little bit about skill sets that aren't exclusive to attorneys, although they're not exclusive to attorneys.
No, they shouldn't be.
Right? They're very much.
Sometimes they are, but they shouldn't be.
Amen. But in terms of what we're seeing as demand, and also where unique leverage comes, if you have these skills, you are, headed towards, I would say, future state hires more than past state hires. And so these are the things that we're encouraging candidates to go chasing in terms of leveling up their skill set or leveling up their tool stack knowledge. And I just thought it was so interesting when I saw Kelly's report, and maybe Sarah or somebody can put a link to the report, or Kelly, maybe you can put a link to the report so everybody can go read the whole thing. Yeah. It's an amazing report, and it is chock full of great stuff. But this next slide was what stood out to me. So these are the issues that Kelly's report cites as being, proportionally, what are the greatest issues, right? With failure to produce at the top. And Kelly, you could talk to us a little bit about what this slide is, but the reason I put it up against the slide we just saw was to say, hey, if these are the things that are coming up in terms of issues in eDiscovery, at least for the lawyers, you would think that the skill sets or the experiences that would be most sought after for an eDiscovery lawyer would sort of coincide with what you're seeing here in this chart as maybe a separate or a different lens to look at skill set evaluation and up-leveling for eDiscovery professionals. I'll stop talking now and let you tell us what we're looking at.
Sure. Well, I don't know that the two are they're a little bit apples and oranges, to be honest.
Sure.
So what you're looking at here is a chart of, I think, the 20 or 40 most prolific issues in eDiscovery in the case law last year. So in 2024, at eDiscovery Assistant, we part of the application includes a curated database of eDiscovery case law, and we tag everything using our proprietary issue tagging structure. So each of these issues that you see listed here are part of our issue tagging structure. And I think as we were talking about preparing for today, one of the things that I mentioned is that if you look at the last 5 years, I think this is the 5th year we've done this report, failure to produce proportionality and sanctions are kind of always going to be at the top, because the bulk of eDiscovery case law is about somebody being upset that they didn't get something or that they wanted more than what they got. And that is failure to produce. So that's always going to be kind of the number one tag in eDiscovery case law. Proportionality has become the go-to argument for why you shouldn't be required to do something. And so we see proportionality. One of the things that's really important to note is when we add an issue tag to a case in our software, it's because the issue is specifically discussed. So there's a big difference between a search term for Facebook and an issue tag for Facebook. So an issue tag for Facebook would include a case that specifically discusses that. So from a jobs perspective and from an analysis of this particular chart perspective, I think what's compelling here is, and this also goes to my comment before about what lawyers should know that they don't know, is that these are the issues that are really coming up time and time and time again. So if you are a technical person in the eDiscovery universe, the more you can understand about these issues, the more value you can provide in the work that you're doing. You can look at the data from a mobile device, and if you know and understand what the legal issues are in the case, and you're part of a team, then you can offer more insights to your lawyers about what you're seeing in that data. Oftentimes I'll say to my technical people, hey, I really want to know if we have X. I really want to know who said Y. I really want to know what we can do around this particular issue and whether I can mount some sort of defense about that. And so then if I explain to you what I'm looking for, and there's that collaboration between the attorneys on the issues that you see here on this chart with the technical folks, there's so much more that you can do together as a team. So these issues are really important. I think some of the ones that also kind of get lost, if you look at video, which is right in the middle, that's up a lot from last year. And we saw some really compelling cases this year on video. So while these numbers are one snapshot of the data, what they aren't showing you is where the uptick is in all of the numbers of these issues over the last few years. And we'll start to do some of that on our blog and in the platform.
I think it's really good guidance for people, even if they're not practicing attorneys, as you said, Kelly, to understand this is what the attorney's greatest pain points are and where they're likely to get pushback and need assistance. And being able just to understand the nomenclature and anticipate some of these needs based on the nature of the case is going to make you a more powerful support system for an attorney and
Yeah,
staff.
it absolutely is. And even just like literally 45 minutes ago, I just did case of the week for this week. And the case of the week was the latest on what's happening on hyperlinked files. And hyperlinked files doesn't even make this list because there's less than 95 cases in it. But over this last year, we had huge development in that issue. And the case this week, one of the segments of there were multiple issues in the case, but one of them was whether or not you have to provide documents at hyperlinks that are produced in an email thread. And the reality is that if you're one of the folks looking at that data in those email threads, you're going to have to be working on how to figure out how to identify those URLs if you aren't given them as metadata. And whether that document is in fact relevant, you may be asked to help counsel identify what documents are relevant or what they should ask for if they're allowed to go to the other side. So today's case of the week's really relevant to bridge that gap, because a lot of times we just see lawyers wanting to make arguments, but not necessarily having the technical knowledge to make them effectively.
So if we pull back, Kelly, and we look at the next slide, MT, and start thinking about this less at the micro level of what skill set evolution or augmentation a job seeker or a hiring manager may need to complete their team or their career, and we just start looking at the number of cases. I mean, I saw this as just a crazy bit of data. I'm a data nerd, so this is really compelling to me. Obviously, there's a huge uptick starting around 2017 that hits a sort of zenith in 2021, just in terms of the number of cases that are tagged with eDiscovery issues. And unpack for us, what is the reason for the inflection? What does it have to do with geopolitical or macroeconomic events like changes in leadership at the White House or COVID? How do all of these things factor into what we're looking at here? Because this is a massive uptick.
Yeah, it is. Well, so 2019 to 2020, right? That's when you're looking at COVID. And courts started holding remote hearings. And as soon as they started holding remote hearings, they also started instituting new practices like letter writing briefs or the ability to contact the court and set up a hearing pretty quickly on decisions. We also have a lot more discovery decisions issued as written decisions as opposed to minute orders. A minute order, if you ever look at a docket, it'll just say minute order, the court orders A, B, C, D, right? Those aren't published. Those aren't out there for anybody to search on a legal research platform. But as we started seeing more of those in COVID, then it's just gone up exponentially. And I think some of the change is that lawyers have started to recognize how many issues there are when it comes to ESI and the need to be on top of those issues. We've seen a lot more arguments around disputes on setting up ESI protocols or arguing what's included in an ESI protocol. The decision I did today touches on that. You also see all these new sources of information that we never had before: video, wearable devices, audio, all kinds of different sources, chat messages, instant messages, text messages is huge that we're seeing, and all of those come up. And if you're knowledgeable about what you're entitled to and you're knowledgeable about how to go and get it, then you've got an incredible opportunity here. And I think this uptick in large part reflects lawyers trying to leverage that opportunity to be able to go and get ESI. To me, ESI is a huge opportunity for you to understand and know your case better, more out of the gate.
Kelly, do you think that we're going to see an even greater acceleration in this, what appears to be sort of a post-COVID plateau, right? Where we're sort of hovering somewhere between 5,000 and 6,000 a year for the last 4 years. Do you think with the Trump administration, the amount of litigation we've already seen since he's taken office, and combining that with the boom of artificial intelligence, making it even more expeditious to do some of this work, do you expect we're going to see another inflection point soon?
Well, I think if you look at that quote that you took out of the report down there, that there was a 22% increase in the number of civil cases. So, right, once a case is filed, it takes months and months for it to get to the discovery process. So I think the discovery issues that we're going to see in that 22% increase are going to show up in 2025 and 2026. And beyond. The In re Uber text case that I covered this morning has 37 discovery disputes in it, 37 written decisions about discovery disputes. So that 22% increase is a phenomenal increase. We already have 711 cases in the database, and we're 3 months into the year. So and we start to see, I mean, if you that 5,091 case for 2024 was pulled in February, we're up to closer to 5,200 for 2024 at this point. And because we keep getting decisions, new decisions get issued and they get put out and things like that. So it's a lot of things. There is usually more litigation in a Republican administration than there is in a Democratic administration. That's interesting because 2024, you saw 22% and Biden was still in office. So is it a hard and fast rule? No. But it's going to be interesting. I don't know. This is a really unprecedented time. I don't know that you could call this a typical Republican administration.
Fair enough. I also think what's interesting for me too is this idea that what the pandemic did is accelerate the timeline in a way that changed the overall process and then ultimately the volume. And that's exactly what we saw in the job market in 21 and 22 because of adoption of things like remote interviewing. 100% of our first round interviews in 2024, and we had thousands, were completely virtual. Only 5%, 95% of all subsequent interviews also virtual. Even for jobs that required an in-office attendance, most of the interview process is still virtual. So because of all that, it made it easier to get stakeholders in a room, just like it was easier to get into a courtroom, just like it was easier to file documents, and hiring happened faster. And we sort of seen that same truncation of timeline to hiring in the way that it appears like we've seen, okay, what might have taken 2018 to 2020 to hit the courts is now happening in 6 months, which is fascinating.
So we've got a couple of questions in the chat, and we are we've got about 10 more minutes. So I just want to make sure we hit some of these questions. So from earlier on, one of the questions was, as far as jobs out there and those salaries going up 10 to 20% for new jobs, is this going to be the height, or do we expect it to increase as the year goes on and into 26 and 2027?
It's a great question.
You can tell us about US versus, like talked about Canada last month. And I know we just did our Canadian salary report. And then we also have like European market, which you and the four of us were talking about before this started.
So the short answer to your question is they're going to go up. Let's go to the salary page, MT. The salaries are going to continue to go up. We're going to see increased demand for more seasoned and experienced talent because we haven't for a couple of years. People have tried to hire less experienced, less expensive talent, and in a lot of instances that has backfired on them and failed and been insufficient to support their customer needs. And so they're up-leveling their staff. We're seeing a lot of that. As you can see here in the third tier markets, salaries have gone up because people are realizing, hey, if I can go hire in a third tier market, that's probably where I'm going to get maybe a lower base salary for talent, but maybe the equal level caliber. So we're actually seeing people take advantage of that. But what's going to happen, and we talked about this last month, is it's going to democratize the salary ranges. And probably in another 6 to 12 months, the roles will pay the same no matter where they are geographically. It won't matter anymore. I think that's where we're headed as a community. But to specifically address the geographic disparities, I would tell you that the UK and Ireland are about 20 to 40% behind what US counterparts are making in terms of compensation, and I don't see them coming up. They're struggling to fill the jobs with the kind of talent that they want. A lot of those UK and EU-based firms are finding that they have a much smaller talent pool to look at. And as they incrementally bring up salaries, that whole market will increase. It won't take too much for that market to move north. Canada's in a kind of a weird state right now. I mean, I'll be really honest. There are a lot of Canadians that don't want to do business with Americans right now.
Shocking.
It's very true.
And, I think for Canadian businesses that are looking to hire only Canadian talent for eDiscovery, you've got a very small talent pool to choose from. It is not the vast ecosystem that the United States or even the United Kingdom is. And
has the administration issued, because I can't keep track of all the executive orders, have they issued an order that makes it more difficult for a Canadian company to hire Americans, or is it simply
we're just talking about nationalism now. Let's keep it real.
Totally agree.
We're talking about nationalistic pride and a decisive decision.
You know, that's an incredible use of that word in context. I have to say that whenever somebody has discussed nationalism to me, I never actually understood what they meant, but it's such a great context now.
Thank you.
Yeah. So I want to be careful not to go down too much.
We don't have to go down a political rabbit hole.
Yes.
But
No, I wasn't trying to do that.
But we're talking about talent
it,
ecosystems, right?
Overall,
and how salaries will increase. So the point here is, if Canadians only want to hire Canadians, then because that talent pool is small, as they hire more and salaries increase, that whole market will move up because there's not a lot of market to choose from. Whereas in the United States, as salaries go up incrementally, it doesn't force a whole market salary baseline to increase. But in smaller markets like Canada and the UK and Ireland, Dublin in particular, you will see that 15, 20 people move jobs and they get 10 to 20% increases. And then there's a ripple effect with backfilling those 10 to 15 people. That moves that whole market north.
Okay. And so the next question, trying not to be too political again, but with all of the recent executive orders, I'm going to say, that are being put in place that are basically towards law firms, do we think that's going to affect the job market? And we're seeing already some of our federal government employees in DC who are working in eDiscovery are being affected. So do we think that's going to affect other areas?
Well, two separate questions. The back half of that question, yeah, I mean, people in the government are going to get laid off and there's going to be displacement, and that's unfortunate. The prior question of like, do I think Gibson, Dunn, and Perkins Coie are in trouble because they've been targeted by Trump? No, I think those law firms are just fine. They're going to be just fine. They're going to continue to do business. I don't think they're being blacklisted. Not that I've seen. They're wonderful firms. They have great eDiscovery departments, both of them. So I think they'll be fine. Yeah.
Well, I don't want to understate though the impact that situation is having on them. But I agree with you that I think, the diversity of their client base is going to be sufficient for them. But it is interesting. I mean, literally there's an article right now talking about other firms removing their DEI related information, ostensibly just to avoid being a target, because it does cost money. But
They're
I
changing
I would
DEI to inclusion.
I was just going to comment too on the job related market from the perspective of what's happening. I think that the consideration is, um, if you have skills, right, and you're continuing to level up your skills, there's going to be a need in the market for you, um, in the eDiscovery market. It's only getting more complex with the more sources of ESI that we have, with the new tools and things coming out with AI and the ability to do that. It's not going to replace jobs. It's going to mean that you need to have a higher skill set in order to be able to
Correct.
keep those jobs.
If
That's
anything,
love- I
it,
love
I
that
think it
point.
diversifies. I think it diversifies job roles,
Right.
right?
I agree.
Over time, it will. I mean, MT, just go back to the two skills thing that we talked about very quickly. First, the one that we created. I mean, this is where you're going to get more bang for your buck, right? We're seeing a higher demand for Rel 1. All these law firms have now subscriptions to Rel 1. They need talent that can wield Rel 1. They are starting to separate the difference between Rel 1 talent and Rel Prem talent, right? As they hire for people that they're looking to build a future on. So things like this really do create leverage. And if you go to Kelly's slide, the next one, MT, I mean, you look here, like if you can't talk about failure to produce, if you can't talk about third-party subpoena, if you can't talk about cost recovery, if you can't talk about, Privlog and these things that are in the top 10 aren't part of your vernacular and vocabulary and aren't part of what you can consult on, and go get that kind of mentorship, because that's where you're going to increase value and be able to raise your hand and volunteer to be an asset and a resource, as opposed to wait to be called upon to do a task.
What I always see with when Kelly puts this report out, right, is the more you understand eDiscovery and what you need to understand as far as the issues will help you to solve for failure to produce, right, or proportionality or sanctions, right? The more that you understand, and I think that goes back to the skill set, right? If you can talk, if you understand eDiscovery across the board and you understand how not to produce the documents, how to put together, as Kelly always puts, an ESI protocol, how to have those conversations ahead of time, that's going to help you down the line in a lot of these areas, right? If you have an eDiscovery skill set.
Maribel, I would add to that more specifically for people who have an interest in moving in-house to corporate positions, which are less than 5% of the available jobs in the marketplace. And so they're much more competitive. This is where you're going to probably have more impact, because this is corporations are dealing with these problems and addressing these problems and saying, do we want to bring a resource in-house that can help us solve these, or are we going to continue to lean on outside counsel and vendors? So in a lot of ways, like if you're focusing on moving into corporate and this top 10 is, not in the palm of your hand, then it probably should be if that's your agenda. I just want to go very quickly to show everybody the data on contract versus direct hire, because it is so erratic, as you could see month over month. And you could see just how aggressively things have turned in the first quarter of this year to full-time hiring. I mean, even coming out of the fourth quarter, like there's been a lot of full-time hiring in eDiscovery right now. Now, part of that may be because the work is steady and consistent, and the adoption of managed services has been prolific, and we haven't seen as many second requests or M&A or business that creates spikes that are not perpetual business growth opportunities, right? If you're adding managed services and layering in more perpetual subscription-based clients, your business sort of has a trajectory. If you're dealing in a lot of transactional revenue and you have spikes and valleys, that's when we see a lot of contract augmentation to handle overflow. So I don't know if this is indicative of a more predictable eDiscovery ecosystem. It might be, because we haven't seen as much contract staffing over the last, really 4 years. I mean, it's pretty unusual. You could see just how it's slowly evening out, which usually means we're headed towards a job market where hiring managers are cautious. And I think that's right if we look at what's happening at a macro level in our world. But you could see that full-time hiring is still the dominant modality.
So we got 2 questions, and I just want to make sure we answer them because we've got 1 minute. We'll probably go over if Kelly has a couple of minutes to give us still. Is the Rel 1 uptick true for just the US or everywhere? And I think I know the answer, but Jared?
It's definitely everywhere. I think in particular everywhere, because part of the, I think, draw to Rel 1 is the ability to use it for adoption for a global ecosystem of service, whether it's follow the sun or not. You're also seeing a lot of these firms that are Magic Circle firms or big firms in the UK and Europe acquiring firms here in the United States, or vice versa, or consulting firms becoming law firms. And we're seeing that happen
Can I
too.
add to that, Jared? Do you mind?
Please.
It's definitely everywhere. It's definitely all over Europe. It's definitely all over England. And Australia, South Africa. I mean,
Relativity's having its first Australia event this year.
yeah. And what I think is really different is that the economies and the way that those countries look at technology is very different than the United States. And you got to remember that law firms are about profits per partner, and buying new technology detracts from profits per partner. So those partners want to stay with that technology as long as humanly possible until they have to put more money in, right? And the attitude overseas is a bit different. And so that, I think, plays into the adoption of technology overseas faster and better, but also the regulations and the laws about data handling are better in other parts of the world than they are in the United States.
Well said.
So last question, and then Jared, I don't know if you've got a couple more slides or if Kelly has anything, but someone asked us to define service provider as you define, as you use it in your slide.
Yeah, so service provider is anybody that is a consulting firm or vendor that is not a software company. So, Relativity would be a software company. Everlaw is a software company. So we would categorize job openings in companies like Reveal, software company. We categorize jobs like that in the software company pie slice.
eDiscovery Assistant, software company, just to throw it out there.
Say that again, Kelly.
eDiscovery Assistant, software company.
Great.
Yes.
There you go. Another example. Service providers generally, they might have their own software, but for example, jobs at, some of the 800-pound gorillas like Epic or Concilio or Lighthouse, or we would consider all of those to be vendors.
And they consider themselves not software providers, more solution providers.
Yeah, I think that's right. SaaS providers, I would probably put in software though. I mean, if they're software as a service, they're software company, generally speaking. I would categorize Disco generally as a software company, although I know that obviously they have a services component to their business.
Good. Anything else you want to share with us from the deck, or are we good?
I think we're good. I mean, you can see the remote hybrid. You can see motivations just to show you the data we've got here. Opportunism is definitely moving up in the ranks. I think people are looking for what's next. I think a lot of that has to do with AI and trying to find opportunities to leverage it. And I think that's most of our data for this month. Yes, MT? Yeah, we've got a great guest in April. If you don't know Glenn McFarlane, he's a legend in the industry. He was at JP Morgan Chase for many, many, many years. He's now over at Kroll. He's a super cool, super intelligent guy, and we're excited to have him. And Kelly, you've been amazing. Thank you for being our guest host. And please read Kelly's report. It is brilliant and full of a lot more data than we were able to extract today.
Yes. And then for anyone, I will place in our chat, anyone going to Legal Week, the three of us will be there. Mike will be there as well. Please feel free to reach out to us. ACEDS is hosting its annual reception at Legal Week, so please join us there if you can. We always love to see all of our community members. What else do we want to say? Glenn, who is joining us next week. Well, Kelly is director at large for our Denver chapter, which is relaunching in a month or so. And Glenn McFarlane is chapter membership director for New York. So please feel free to reach out to them. And as far as upskilling, don't forget ACEDS membership is $99 this year. So we wanted to make sure everyone knows that, get access to all of the on-demand. And I think someone did ask if this is being recorded. It is. And Jared also puts together a blog post about this session afterwards. So please look for that. And look for Kelly's Case of the Week, which she mentioned earlier on in the call. It's every Tuesday. We live stream that across YouTube, Facebook, LinkedIn. So wherever you can get it, we have that Case of the Week. We will see you next month. And until then, hopefully, if you've got any questions, feel free to connect with us.
Bye, everyone. Thanks.
Bye, everyone.